The words January and harvest usually don't go together here in Zone 5, but thanks to our hoop house, low tunnels, and cold frames, there's still a lot to harvest from our winter garden. Today I'd like to invite you to join me as I gather a harvest in mid-January in Zone 5. In my last video I showed you how our plants are doing here in the hoop house after 2 weeks with temperatures often below 0 degrees Fahrenheit or -18 Celsius. Though most of the plants are doing very well, we do have some plants that are struggling a bit. And my strategy in harvesting in winter is to harvest those plants that are struggling first, and that way we get a chance to enjoy them before they're potentially lost to the cold. And I save the plants that are doing well to harvest later in the winter. One of the areas where the plants are struggling is at the front of this cold frame near the door, where there appears to be a draft. So I'll start my harvest there. Excuse me, Oscar. When I remove this lid, you'll see that I have kale, Swiss chard, and lettuce that's drooping. Most of the plants are still alive and healthy, but the fact they're drooping shows that they're a little more vulnerable to the cold than some of our other plants. So I'll start my harvest here. Okay, let's start in the back here where our Swiss chard is drooping. And I'm going to harvest this fairly aggressively, just to make sure I get these plants harvested before they are potentially lost to the cold. Not surprisingly, January is our low point in terms of production from the garden. And that's because it's our coldest month of the year. Daylight hours are under 10. And that brings growth pretty much to a halt. When you combine that with the fact that we're regularly harvesting from the garden, usually about 3 times a week, the garden starts to thin out pretty much in January. Fortunately, growth resumes in February when our hours of daylight are above 10 again and temperatures start increasing. And that's actually when we start planting under cover as well. This is Siber Frill kale that I'm harvesting, and we really love this kale. Unfortunately, it's not quite as cold hardy as I had hoped. Star boar is definitely more cold hardy, and I think even dinosaur kale is more cold hardy. Today I'm hoping to harvest enough greens for at least a few days. It looks like I can get them from just in this area right here. There's a lot of greens. Even though you can't harvest nearly as wide a variety of crops in winter as you can in the summer, the fact that we're able to grow greens saves us a lot of money because organic greens are very expensive at the grocery store. And we also grow carrots all winter long. And that brings us to the most vulnerable plants in this entire area. That's this red romaine lettuce. This plant still looks pretty good, but I'm going to go ahead and harvest the whole plant because these are really struggling. This plant's not too bad. Fortunately, I think I got to these plants just in time. At the moment, the leaves are still fairly crispy, but I think if I left them much longer, they'd be a little too mushy to eat. Okay, I think that's all I'll harvest right now. The remaining plants have all of the large droopy leaves removed, and because the leaves are now smaller, they have less surface area, which makes them less vulnerable to the cold. They're also closer to the ground, and that gives them more warmth. So these plants should do just fine, even with the leaky door, which I still need to figure out and fix. Now let's harvest some collard greens. Excuse me, bud. Our collards were very droopy during the recent cold spell, but most of them have bounced back. So I'll harvest only the plants that still look a little bit stressed from the cold. And again, I'm just using the indicator of droopy leaves. Collards are sweeter after cold weather, so these leaves should be nice and sweet. Okay, I think that's all the collards I'll harvest for now. When I make a mixed greens salad, like I will later today, I like to have some tender greens along with our more tough greens like kale and collards. So I really want to harvest more lettuce. Now this lettuce here is doing so well that I want to leave it alone and save this for later this winter. It's got no signs of stress whatsoever. And it's even growing, which is remarkable. So I'm going to leave it alone This will be our lettuce for February and March. And instead, I'll harvest some lettuce from this cold frame. This lettuce is also doing very well, but we have lost some leaves to the cold. So what I'll do is just harvest some of the individual leaves and let the rest of the plants grow. These plants were very droopy after our sub-zero weather, but they really bounced back nicely. Beautiful plants. Okay, I have almost enough lettuce for our salads. Again, I want enough for a few days. This should be enough lettuce so that our salads won't be too tough to chew. Don't want it to be all kale and collards. Okay, that should do it for the lettuce. Now let's harvest some mustards. Okay, over here we have some volunteer mustard greens. They came up all on their own from seeds we let drop last spring. And we like to add just a little bit of mustard greens to our salads for a little bit of spice. They can be a bit overwhelming on their own, so if you're new to mustard greens, I recommend eating them with other greens and not all by themselves. Okay, I think that's all the greens I'll harvest from the hoop house today. And here's a look at today's final harvest. I had hoped to harvest carrots, sunchokes, and more greens from outside the hoop house today. But even though it's 70 degrees in here, it's only 12 degrees outside, and the rest of the beds don't get enough sun at this time of the year. And the soil is still frozen, and many of the plants are frozen as well, so I don't want to harvest them or even open up the structures today. That will have to wait for my February harvest video, which I plan on doing in the middle of the month. By then, I hope to be planting new crops for the spring, and we should see a lot of new growth in the plants here in the hoop house and in our other structures. I'm going to head inside now to make dinner, and I'll be back in a moment to show you what I made with today's harvest. Well, I'm back with my salad, and today I decided to make a Greek-inspired salad. And of course, I used my mixed greens as the base, and I also added from the store feta cheese, pita bread, cucumbers, onions, grape tomatoes, and this is vegetarian gyros. Of course, you can also add meat gyros. And on top of this, I'll add a Greek salad dressing. A salad this size is usually big enough for me for dinner, though I sometimes will go back for seconds. And I'm going to head inside right now and have this salad. I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more videos on how to grow a lot of food on a little land without spending much or working harder than you have to.